Anyone here for public comment? No, seeing none. Approval of minutes from August 20th.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from August 20th.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, got a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Reports from city officials, account balances, open projects, correspondence, related business. Jamie, you wanna just rip through the balances there?
So, current balance, reserve for open space, $60,000. Reserve for historic preservation, $60,027. Reserve for affordable housing, $161,812. Reserve fund, $266,000. Undesignated, $615,352, for a total of $1.16 million.
Okay. Leaves us a little to use up over the next year or so. Well, Jamie, I guess on the next item is continuing business, Valley CDC.
Yeah.
If I read your email, they've withdrawn their proposal. Maybe
Yes.
they want to just elaborate a little? Or-
Yeah, so, at the beginning of September, Valley CDC met with myself, Jessica, the mayor, and the finance director, to try to hash out some of those lingering issues that were sort of brought up at the last CPA meeting. And over the course of the conversation, it was sort of the finance director, Melissa, mentioned that due to the amount of the services, if the city's contracting for services over a certain dollar amount, you can't just award it to a single entity. You have to go through a public bid and procurement process. And because of their administrative fee, part of that, she felt that it would have had to be publicly bid, which would have had the result of Valley bringing the application to the board recommending it, getting it approved, and then the city having to put out a public bid and Valley may or may not have been the recipient of that process. So it was gonna be a lot more on the city to make it happen, and Valley, not being certain of the outcome, decided to withdraw at that point. The housing partnership was then subsequently notified of that, and they are trying to determine whether or not it's still a priority for them. And if it is a priority for them, they will work with probably the planning department to develop an RFP, a request for proposals, and come to the CPA to ask for an appropriation to fund whatever they feel that request for proposals would be the right amount. So for instance, if they thought it was, if they just more or less took Valley's proposal, then they would say $75,000 for first-time homebuyer, and if the CPA awarded the housing partnership, that funds to then be RFP'd, the services would be bid out in a public process. So, the city's getting the best deal for those services.
And then Valley CDC could jump in at that point.
Right. So
If they were the low bidder or someone else.
yeah, or
That
someone
was
else.
qualified,
They could bid.
qualified bid.
Right, they could bid. So, like I said, if anything's gonna go forward with this, it's gonna be from the housing partnership. They've been told what they need to do, and they're trying to figure out where first-time homebuyer is in their priority list of projects to work on. They also have, they wanna do another housing rehab set of projects. So there might be a combined request from them for money to support affordable housing for housing rehab and for first-time home buyer. So it remains to be seen what they determine is the best route. And so maybe early 2016, there might be an application in front of the board for similar to what was already brought forth by Valley.
Okay. I guess I'll probably just for housekeeping entertain a motion to remove Valley CDC from the agenda.
I'll make a motion to remove Valley CDC from the agenda.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second to remove Valley CDC's application from the agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, who seconded?
Me.
Thank you.
Indeed. Okay, moving on to new business and applications. We don't have any new applications. We were discussing, I guess we had some discussions about cost estimates and changes to how to make changes to approve the projects. And Jamie and I talked a little earlier today about it, and I think, and again, Jamie can speak, I'll let Jamie speak for herself, but we were talking about maybe when we have a project that we approve, maybe adding some type of actually kind of listing the conditions or the major conditions that we want, rather than just, and we talked about some of the past projects that haven't been a problem, but in other words, we could have, specified like that as long as the project has, say if we went to the boardwalk, in other words, we're approving 200,000 for a boardwalk, that involves a boardwalk, boat ramps, not being specific railings, so they could change a material or something,
Right.
but they couldn't come and,
Cut the project in half.
right, cut the project in half, or forget it, the boardwalk and just
Right.
have duck boats or something, change the whole thing, so. And then only other thing, Jamie, I thought of, under the, when,
Is
well, go ahead, I'm
that,
sorry.
just a question
Yeah,
on
sure.
that, so is that stipulation then would be part of the approval process, and when somebody files, has a motion in this committee to approve for a certain dollar amount, it would be approved with certain
Conditions.
conditions, is that
Yeah,
how
I
the
think a
motion
little
would
like
go,
the-
or how would you?
I think that's how I would do it. I mean, the motion to me would be because all we can really do here is approve a project and recommend the funding. And then it's really up to the city council, the mayor, to make a final project. So I think I would do it as funding the project and then maybe just having a list of recommended
conditions.
conditions. So in other words, if the city council wanted to change those conditions or the mayor wanted to change
Right.
those conditions, they could be changed. But it would at least go forward to those boards, the board or the mayor, with the idea,
Our
this is what
concerns.
this is what the CPA wanted
Yeah.
for their money.
So it's
But
part of the motion or it's not part of the motion? Those.
I think I would put it as a part of a motion or put it an addendum saying, in other words, the motion with the addendum and have the conditions listed in an addendum to the
Right.
motion.
Okay.
I would add that,
Go ahead.
I don't think everything has to be done all in one. So, the committee can have a vote to approve the funding from a certain account, and then also then saying, in regard to that, we wanna make sure that that the scope is X, Y, and Z, and that the conditions are A, B, and C, and that these other things that we think important also get transmitted along.
And how does the transmittal, just since I like to fill in the blanks for myself, the transmittal would just happen through you or through, how does that
Yeah,
actual formally, if we were to make suggestions that went along
That's-
with that, then what's the communication pipeline for?
Well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, the CPA chair and Jamie forward a request to the mayor to ask for an appropriation. That appropriation then goes to city council finance, and when the finance gets it, we get the whole packet. We get the same material that we have, the application, all the supportive documents, what the committee's work has been. But then really, we have the option of saying, well, okay, that's fine, but we don't think that as much as we think the CPA's got a good idea here, maybe we don't feel they should spend $150,000, they should only spend $100,000 or something. And so it could be, the finance committee could amend the amount, and then really the mayor could, if she didn't like it, she's gonna weigh in anyway with the planning office, and if they didn't like it, they could veto it and come back with something else.
But where would the addendum be? Would it be attached in that document somewhere?
I think I would
To that letter. that
attach it to the
goes-
letter that goes
Yeah.
with the application. In other words, with the request for the funding. In other words, we're requesting, let's say the church up here, because we use that, we're funding $50,000 for the historic preservation of the Congregational Church in the center of town. And in there, because I was saying to Jamie, I was thinking going back to that one, I know it would have never happened, but everybody was for that. But imagine if we didn't specify, and I don't know if we ever did, I have to go back, but what if they had painted it beige?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Not that they ever would have, but we never probably put it there. I guess everyone sits here and assumes that they're gonna paint
That's
it,
right.
they're gonna paint it white.
Right.
And can you imagine the day they painted it beige and somebody's coming through and saying, that's the CPA did
Yeah,
that.
right.
So I think that would be just a thing. In other words, you would say, this is gonna be appropriate, and our recommendation is following that it's, painted in a white color is the closest historically possible to the, the existing, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's my idea, but
So-
I don't think it has to be anything formal. I think it's just when you get the next project that's going forward, I know you do it at that time. I mean,
Okay, that
I don't
makes
think it's
sense.
anything we necessarily have to.
Well, I think it'd be nice
To
to
put
sort
it
of
in a,
formalize it, at least in regards to
Mhm.
how
we want it done,
the
that's fine.
would see it working, just so as the membership changes throughout we're gonna be, down a few members and then we'll get a bunch of new members, so that there's at least an idea of, this is what we think the best process is going forward. Some boards and committees have adopted rules and regulations for how they function. Some boards and committees have adopted Robert's Rules of Order. The CPA, to my knowledge, has not ever adopted any sort of rules. So it's sort of this,
We're lawless.
so it's up to sort of the chair for how they wanna run it, and, we generally follow Robert's rules, but not explicitly.
Okay.
So it might be, if we wanna look at putting together a document that says, this is how the committee does things, then whatever comes out of this discussion would obviously end up in that document as well.
Well, for point of discussion, I guess I'd like to propose that at least, at this time, that we think about having a separate motion to suggest X, Y, or Z specifications or conditions, as
You
we.
can put the conditions in the motion, original
Right.
motion. You could say motion to approve the
We
funding and here to
Some-
follow the conditions.
Yeah, and I'm open to that too. I'm proposing actually separating them and having, passing the motion to fund and then having a separate motion to suggest an addendum that has certain conditions that we can pass on to the city council, so.
And so also the letter, in the packet of information that I had sent out, there was a preliminary letter, a
Yeah.
definitive letter, and then the grant agreement. So every applicant will receive sort of a variation on those two letters. Only city agencies will get only non-city agencies will
Get the
get a
grant.
copy of the grant agreement. So there might be,
The one change.
so if there's general conditions that we wanna add, then they can be added to this form letter. But if they're more specific to each project, then I think Greg's suggestion would.
Have they always gotten this formula?
It was something that Alexis and I sort of worked on, and the committee had some discussion and saw drafts of and made approvals.
So this is a draft, so have you been doing this as part, when someone gets when a project is approved, are they getting these letters, or is this something you're kind of developed now?
Yeah, so sometimes it gets copied into an email, depending on the formality and the organization. So when the city space was awarded for the town hall, they did not get a formal letter like that. They got an email that said more or less the same thing.
Okay.
Because this could be basically what we're saying is, you can put it right in here, right?
Mhm.
In theory, when it then would be this.
Oh, that'd be good. I mean, I guess my only thing is sometimes this might get a little more lost
Right.
than
So
putting it on
these
a
letters
motion.
don't,
or
these letters
whether we put it in the
don't go
motion or
to
addendum
the
to the motion.
don't go to the other approval.
Yeah, no, I
agencies.
think we would wanna.
Because I was gonna say, I don't ever remember getting this sheet
Right.
at the finance.
Okay, so it doesn't go that far, okay.
And I think I think that generally the motion, if we had a, list of requirements or something like that, suggested requirements, we would pass a motion, and part of that motion would be to attach it to the application that goes to the city council, because the whole application goes on to the city council,
City
right?
council,
Right,
So-
but how do the applicants, now what do the applicants get? How did they know? I mean, when we say, okay, we're gonna say that we're giving you this money based on, we would like you to follow these steps or whatever, where is that?
Where's
I
the
mean,
feedback for them?
Where do they get it formal? Do they,
Well,
when
they're
they
getting
like,
this letter
they
back.
get this letter back,
But we'd have to add our conditions.
that's what I'm saying,
to
how do they
this.
know, how do they
Or to
have a
the
written
email.
record of
Well,
the
I mean,
conditions?
yeah, so I mean, that could be easily added,
You know what I mean?
you know,
Just
if
so-
if the committee is voting and the applicant's present, you know, and then it'll say, you know, adding a line at the bottom.
We could
that,
put another line.
You know,
So I'm
as
saying,
you're
'cause-
aware, the committee made the following
Suggested,
you know, so,
recommended
um,
suggestions.
just for an example, with the
You know,
football
if
field.
we had a
you know, they had
verbal, if we had a
originally-
verbal short list of requirements for a given project, who would actually put that together into a written addendum?
Yeah, that's what,
Who physically composes that? I mean, if we're talking about it and we say, we have 2 requirements, or 3
Here's what we want
requirements,
you to
you know,
do.
whatever, and we're talking about them, we know what they are, we've talked about them here in the committee meeting, do you end up like writing that down and putting the addendum together? Does the chair, like how, I'm just curious,
How
cause I
would
don't
we
know.
process, how would the process?
When the way Alexis and I were working, was generally any sort of, paperwork was being handled through the planning department. So I was putting the motion on letterhead and saying, it's like, on such and such a meeting, the board voted that, you know, $700,000 from the, recreation to fund a soccer field and other associated improvements at Montauk Park or whatever, you know, and then it passed by such and such vote.
And you just add the conditions to that.
And so I would just add the conditions to that, you know, it would be, you know, subject to the following conditions or with the following
Recommended.
recommendations.
Recommended
or,
conditions, yeah.
you know, and again, going back to the application is given to the finance subcommittee, but that's the original application, and so if there's any changes from the board along the way that aren't reflected in the applicant submitting a new application, the finance subcommittee only gets, you know, Dan's report, they don't get the city, they don't look at the CPA minutes. So if anything comes up during that discussion that's important, it should be somehow added to, I guess, that motion or that letter.
Which letter?
It's not included here, but it just says that the committee voted on such and such a date.
And that letter goes to the finance committee.
That goes to the mayor, and then the mayor takes that and gives it and
Makes a formal-
submits it to city council.
With a
Is it-
formal appropriation, and it says
So
on there.
so they would know.
Yes, because it would say on there like $600,000 to be appropriated from CPA funds to the following for the purpose of, and then it says that, and that's where you can put it in.
How do we refer to that letter? What's it called?
I don't know. what-
That's a.
Just something sent by.
I call it, their appropriation request, is
Appropriation request.
how I always.
So the appropriation request letter that we sent to the mayor, so the, you know, motion would essentially be to, attach
Proposed conditions,
proposed
recommended
suggestions to the appropriation letter to the mayor? Is that how that would go?
That's how we
Yeah,
do
that's
it.
how I think it
Appropriation
would be.
request letter. Okay.
Again, then I roll back to how does it, and then where does the applicant, the applicant's gonna get this with the because you can verbally tell somebody anything
Right, they're
you
supposed to
want,
do that,
But
right.
they're gonna get this congratulations letter.
And which.
Right.
which
And you're gonna
also-
add that to that too,
To
right?
that,
Right, so if there's
Okay.
things that need to
Just
be
so it's
added to
clear.
it.
right.
In getting to that application, the second to last bullet, it says, please note any significant changes. You see what I
Which
mean?
Yes.
one are we on, the preliminary?
When they,
or-
no, not the preliminary, when they actually get
CPA
the,
one.
when they get the award.
Mhm.
I was thinking if we put, please note that any significant changes to the project requires approval, it says now, should we write that requires prior approval by the CPA committee and or the city council and the mayor? My thing being with, and I guess that's a little like, being around the city long enough, a lot of times what happens is they do it and then come back and say, well, you know, we did
We did it.
this.
Right, it's too
uh,
late.
And ask for
It's easier to beg
forgiveness.
it's easier to beg
Right,
for
whereas if you put it up
forgiveness.
front, that if you're gonna make any type of, what may be a major change, and it says in here, if you have any questions of
Right.
whether it's a major change, contact Jamie, that if we put in there prior to, you know,
Making
changes to
change,
project
yeah.
requires prior approval, so if they're gonna make a major change to what we've asked, that they have to get a prior approval from the CPA, the city council, the mayor, and Jamie can guide them in that, as it says it there, but it'd just be a one-word thing that would, I think, make it, I don't know, Greg, I don't know if you think that just gives it a little more teeth of,
It's an easy change to make, I would go with that, sure.
I do wanna sort of point out that, as far as process goes, once the recommendation of the CPA leaves the committee, the CPA sort of loses all jurisdiction over projects.
Okay.
And so the only, once it goes up to city council and the mayor, it's really in their court to determine whether or not a project gets canceled or the money's taken away or what have you. And so,
So you would then just take the CPA committee right out of it, right?
but there is this like, I guess I don't know how to deal with that because there's really no teeth. But we can still make, you can
That's what I
still,
wanted to ask
you
is-
can still ask an applicant to come
At
back.
what point would something kick in that would actually remove money, and it sounds like what you're saying is, first of all, it wouldn't be us. It would be up the chain.
So, yeah, they're the final approval.
But I mean, you could make the recommendation that this project,
If the estimate changes by 15% or more, then
That's what we had started on, as I
Right.
recall, was we
Right.
were saying, look, that it's just a boilerplate statement. If the cost changes by more than 15%, or the character or nature of the project is altered by more than whatever, then we don't feel that we approved that
Yeah, you need
project,
you
then
need to come
approved
back.
something else. And so I don't know if there is any recourse to bringing that back around to us for approval or disapproval, or if what I'm hearing is, well, all we can do is put it in our letter up the chain that we would like them to keep in mind that if it changed radically, we don't necessarily
Yeah,
approve.
right.
and I think that's why it's important to list in the motion or as a second motion, but something that gets
Something
passed
that's
up
with that
that
appropriation.
says, you know, this is the scope, this is what the CPA was told was told that they were getting, and this is what the CPA is recommending gets funded. So, for instance, in the football field, the CPA approved a football field and was informed of the methods for how that field was gonna be constructed, but didn't actually, like, the methods for how that football field could be created are sort of up to eventually the
Project
authority,
coordinator.
the project person who's doing that project, in this case, the school department. So unless it said, you know, must follow the plans and specs exactly 100%, you know, which is,
never's really gonna happen.
That's not gonna, you can't, that's too restricted on that. Yeah.
but so making sure that the recommendation includes a scope, that then it's clear when those items are no longer being included, that's something that's significant, like you've included the, you know, the football field, the important pieces are the football field, the drainage, the goalpost or whatever, but not necessarily the 3,000 yards of loam and sand and gravel and, you know, what diameter pipe and,
So typically then, what, the first line of our motion or after our motion for whatever restrictions we wanna put on it would be if this project overruns by whatever, 20%.
Percentage we determine.
That would
at
be
the time.
like standard for us, that would become like standard, that would be our first thing that we would want them to meet, whatever requirement, right, in general? So at least everybody up the chain knows this is how we think. We still have no
It sounds
control.
like we don't have any actual.
I mean, I guess what I'm
we-
suggesting
but
is
as
that,
one of
what I'm
our-
suggesting is that there's the change in, if it's linked more to the change of scope and less about the money, because if the applicant's able to come up with the
On
difference,
the other side,
or the
in other
applicant's
words, they're
able
not
to-
asking for more money,
if
they're asking.
they're not changing what they said they were gonna do, how does that materially affect the committee? You know, if the applicant says it's gonna cost, $300,000 to paint the church, they got the quotes for 600,000, and by changing the paint, the type of paint, they go from an acrylic to latex or something like that. And they're still painting it white, and they're still doing the job that they said they were gonna do. And they're both gonna last 20 years, according to the manufacturer. How does that?
Right.
What we're aiming at is when it does result in them coming back saying, oh, well, we thought it would only cost 300, now we find out it costs 500,000, how about some more money?
That, and also,
That's-
what are they tell us they're gonna do.
Watercolor.
They're gonna build something, yeah, they tell us they're gonna build this, and they're gonna have, whatever, asphalt walkways going in, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, we can't afford the asphalt walkway, so there's gonna be no walkway, and you go, wait a minute, that's not what you told us, you told us this was gonna be,
Right, the scope of the
The
project
scope
has
of the
changed
project.
by
Right,
50%.
so that's more about the scope changing than
Than
the
the money.
dollar amount.
Which is why I like that prior, in other words, that any major changes are done prior to, that they know, before they make the change, that they notify either the committee or the city council or the mayor prior to them making the changes. In other words, they can't just make that change. That's what I'm always afraid of, they make the change.
Right.
And,
Well,
But
in the
it-
case of that football field, the city was party to those changes, is my understanding.
the school department.
Yeah, school department was going on, yes.
The school committee, because that's what, most 90% of them go to the city council.
Right.
The thing with and the funding for the football went through the city council and the mayor, but then, because schools have autonomy, once the actual funds are transferred over to the school department, then it falls under the superintendent of the school committee to actually manage that money in any way they see fit.
so we, even, no matter what, we thought it, they're in
They
control.
could, they
So-
theoretically could change in any way they want. I know, again, I won't be on next year, but I know certainly if we keep that in there, and I'd definitely keep in the CPA committee with the city council and that in here, because as far as I'm concerned, right up until the time you have a public hearing with a whole full city council, I think the city council would be more than happy to listen to the CPA committee come back. Like if you had concerns after the fact, before it was approved. In other words, if whether it was the chair or other members came to a city council meeting and said, listen, now that we asked you for the money, this is what we wanted, these were the conditions we asked, but now we find out they're not doing this and they're gonna do this. Certainly before that final vote, I think most city councilors would look very favorably on the committee, saying, now maybe they wouldn't, but I would think they would, these are the ones that I'm doing. So that's why I think I would keep that in there, the CPA, even though maybe they theoretically wouldn't have to come back to us.
Yeah.
And I like the point that it kind of puts them coming back to Jamie too, so that,
Right.
you've got a handle on what's going on, because, things can fall through the cracks, whereas develop any type of these projects that are really gonna work through whether they're appropriated by the city or the school department or everything that, unfortunately sometimes for Jamie and Jessica, everything seems to flow back through the planning department, so I don't know if you guys want one more meeting just to think this through, and then maybe we can actually write up some motions, or, we don't have to put it together necessarily tonight.
Right.
I think I'd like one more just to kind of come
Okay.
up with,
Yeah, chew on
sit
it a
down
little bit.
and think how we wanna put it, and maybe I'll actually try to write something up, maybe come in with Jamie between now and the next meeting, and try to hammer out some language, and then we can debate specific language on how we might wanna add it.
What are we adding the language to again?
Well, I think that's still in the air. I think if I get the consensus of most here, I think we probably want to put it right on the appropriation, or either part of the appropriation or as an addendum to the appropriation, so that it follows with them. And then also in this letter, this award letter, that, you've been
Goes
awarded
to-
this, and here's the following conditions that are recommended by the CPA committee to meet, the major conditions.
I'm wondering if we can have,
You think-
that sounds good. I'm wondering if we can have some sort of maybe default or standard or boilerplate kind, and that maybe this is where you're going or whatever, that addresses your concern, John, too, that basically says the CPA committee recommends that if costs exceed, by more than, go over by more than 15%, that the CPA be informed and
Yeah.
Yeah, the costs are easy.
or consulted or something like that.
Cost is easy.
And it's a recommendation, doesn't have teeth or whatever, but essentially whoever ends up receiving, whether it's the school committee or city council or something like that, has this as a formal kind of request / recommendation from the CPA committee that if, you know, past a certain threshold, there is an expectation here. There's an expectation that we're going to be brought back into the conversation if it looks like it's gonna be double the cost, or if, you know, it's like exceed by some threshold, whatever we decide.
And my understanding is we want that first for the applicants to know that that's a condition that will be expected, so even before they're necessarily formalizing their request, they know that, oh, look, if it changes a lot, we need to bring it back. And then, and this is where I'm not entirely clear, so we can have a boilerplate statement on that, and then is the letter that goes on up to the higher ups, do we want that to have an addendum that speaks to specific things about that individual project, or is that also intended to be a boilerplate thing?
Well, I think you can have, my thought was that you could have the sort of boilerplate request / recommendation that if it exceeds by a certain amount, that the CPA committee will at least be consulted, but then you can have project-specific recommendations vis-a-vis, you know, whatever, paint color specifications or something like that, that, you know, so if you think of it as sort of a bullet point, you have maybe 1 or 2 that are just sort of your generally standard.
That are on most virtually.
That are
Right.
on, that are on most, that
Yeah,
we
the
sort of
cost
have as an
one or whatever
expectation,
else
but
you
then,
want, right.
you know, likely there might be a couple thrown on there that just sort of help to kind of contain the scope of the project within what we're hearing in this committee.
And you don't have to put the whole, on this recommendations, we don't have to put the whole, I mean, the city council gets that whole application. I mean, they got the whole thing that's gonna
Right,
be
they're
built.
looking at
It's
it.
just, I think, with human nature, I think you just wanna emphasize, these are what we really recommend, so that, you know, you can kind of, cause, you know, human nature can be laziness of not going through that packet, and
Right.
if it's out there, the counselors are gonna look and say, okay, they wanted these 4 things, is, you know, and they can question the applicant at that level also, you know, are you still doing this, are you still doing
Right,
this, are you
right.
still?
And many projects may not warrant
And some big
project-specific recommendations, either because of the, you know, it
The way the
seems
nature
pretty
of the
straightforward, or, you know, it's a smaller project, or reliable, you know, whoever's bringing it forward, we know, there's a greater degree of certainty or trust or something like that. So, I mean, but at least you have the opportunity to kind of.
It's sort of exposed a loophole in the process where it was easy for an applicant to make radical changes and everything was essentially already approved, and so there's nothing that would work as a catch or a trap to note these are significant changes. This changes the entire nature of the project as it goes up the food chain. It's just
But I mean, so just to, the changes that occurred were after the city council and the mayor finalized that appropriation.
Which is yet another question, is there anything that would actually break the camel's back? Is there enough of a radical change that even though they'd gotten the money, they started the project, and then the cost overruns are triple, what happens? Does anything ever say, whoa?
The money
yeah.
is never given, CPA money is never given till, I mean, it's given person.
It depends on the agency, so
Right.
for.
It's not supposed to be till it's
for-
done, or at least the last payment.
So
It's
for,
like buying a house, or whatever, you make 4 payments.
Par-
over it.
Buying a machine.
for city departments such as the Parks Department, or if like the DPW was doing a land protection or water supply or something like that, they would get the money upfront. It would be transferred to their account once that appropriation is finalized. For outside agencies, it's all done on a sort of grant basis where they either pay and then the city will reimburse them upon proof of payment, or the city will pay their contractors directly. And a few city agencies work on that same model. So like the city space, the old town hall works on that model. The school department works also on that model, just because of the way that their financial account system works with the city's financial accounts. It makes it much easier to run it like a grant project. So they don't get the money. They can't just they're not given the.
They run it like a cost reimbursement, is that what you're saying? They run it like a
for
grant
the
project?
for the school department and for the city space, and I'm trying to think of but like the housing project, where there's a wheelchair, handicapped accessible bathroom and wheelchair ramp, that was paid out after they submitted invoices showing that they had done the work and paid it out already.
Well, I think this has at least been a more thorough discussion in this than we've had, but I think we should take one more meeting and kind of all think it around, because I don't wanna make it too, in the end, too cumbersome, where we're putting the conditions in 4 different places.
Right.
I mean, I wanna try to make it user-friendly to the applicant and to the planning office and to the, but I do think we got some good ideas, I think, of ways of putting it in, and I do like maybe a couple of basic boilerplates on there, and then, again, some just major bullet things of the project, not again going through the project by, each little thing. I think we can do it.
I'm fine with that. Did you kind of get your concern or question addressed? Because I'm
Yeah,
not sure
I
I
think
fully
so.
got the answer to your question and
I
all of that.
think we
so-
did, and I made a realization through the process as well. I think, yeah, we realized that there was something about the nature of all of this that sort of made allowances for people to sort of worm their way through and not concern themselves about, oh yeah, it's radically different than what we told the CPA, but hey, we got our money, we're good.
Right.
There's that end of the spectrum. There's also, now that I'm hearing how the money is distributed, also a bit of a realization too, that to some degree, they still get the same amount of money. It could change radically, and in some ways, it doesn't really affect the pool of funds that we're drawing from and our ability to award to other applicants. At the same time, I think at the very least, verbiage in there that indicates the intention of the CPA is that when we approve a project, if it radically changes, we don't feel that that's the project we approved, so we would like everyone to give consideration to the possibility that it needs to be reassessed. But
We
that's all.
can't enforce it, that's
But
all.
we can't enforce it, exactly.
But I think a good example was
Letter of
the
intent.
pond project. In other words, they came in with an estimate, they had all the design stuff, and it came almost double.
Right.
Right.
Now, had the mayor not found a grant from across the street that was close enough that they could put onto that, I think it's very wide, if we had this in there, just what you're saying, if they had to come back and came back looking for another 100 or 200,000 from CPA, you would certainly have every reason then not to issue if you didn't feel it, you know what I'm saying?
And
Or if you felt they were trying to do something,
And if they come up with the difference in money, it
Right.
may not matter.
it may not
So,
matter. Right.
To us. it's
To us, because the
right.
project's still there, we didn't put that much.
You
on
got
it.
done to spec and,
Yeah, I think it's more, the best example is these things where it's a radical change
Right.
in the nature of the project, not even necessarily the money.
Right.
But yes, it was gonna be boardwalks and handicap accessible.
Right.
Now it's no longer handicap
No.
accessible, we've got the boardwalks.
We got a diving
Now,
board.
now we feel like, well, that's not what you
Plywood ramp.
proposed, that's not what we approved.
plywood deck and
So,
e-boat.
Basketball or something.
So in the case of the football, so just as taking the football field as an example here. So we approve football field, let's say, it goes to city council, mayor and city council, it gets appropriated to school committee, let's say. Now they have the money, they go out, they, whatever, they have the funds, they get the contractors to do the work. They actually decide they don't want a football field, they want a soccer field, or they want something
Yes, they can do what they
something
want.
else. But what we're basically saying is that we've appropriated the money, understanding that it's a football field. But if the school committee decides, no, we actually want a track, or we want
Yeah, parking
something
lot
else,
or whatever.
we don't have any
Nothing
that's
we can do
totally
about it.
their prerogative. Is that what I'm hearing?
So
is there
that,
any-
that, at that point. I
Aside
think-
from damaging relationships
No,
within
I
the
think,
city,
I think at that point,
yeah.
I guess there's not been a precedent of someone changing a scope that radically. So, but again, it is the mayor makes all the appropriations, so the mayor could decide, we're not gonna, nothing's been paid out, so the mayor could decide, we're not paying for this, that's different than,
But if they went and
What?
built the track, then be done and,
But they'd have to have the appropriation to build it, I think that's what Jamie's saying.
will they get the
Which was
appropriation?
already
Right,
approved.
the- your money-
They have to
the
cash
school
this money.
department-
They have
the
the
school department's a little
Well,
different.
right, but I mean, they get approval for
Football.
a football field and they build a track,
After they got the money.
you know, then
Can they?
that's,
And again, you can't tell how things would happen, but also the next year when the budget comes out, there's nothing saying the city council isn't gonna say to the school committee, well, geez, here's what we were gonna appropriate, but we're taking $200,000.
Well, they say there's a
You know,
damage,
there's
there's
a
a damaging of the
consequence.
relationship that
Right.
can have other consequences,
Right.
but I'm just
You're
curious.
saying, could they do it?
Yeah, I
Well,
think,
they could.
you know, you're talking to a CPA who, like, you know, I deal with internal controls and I deal with, you know, if something kicks in that stops bad things from happening, whether it's misappropriation of funds or other kinds of things. So, like, are there any real, you would say teeth, I might say some controls, either at the city level or at the CPA level, or you know,
Somebody.
that would somehow kick in to prevent. I mean, and I'm not saying that this is a likely scenario. I'm just curious how. I'm trying to
Is
get.
there a fail-safe?
I'm trying to get a sense of what
Right.
the mechanics of
Mhm.
our city operations are, and I don't.
I
fully
believe if
understand
there
them,
isn't a
so.
fail-safe, someone will find that
And
limit,
you're-
at the end-
and
at the
they'll
end of
cross
the-
that
and
line.
you're very
at
astute.
the end of the day, the mayor is the one who signs off on these appropriations. They sign off, in the case of a reimbursement request, they're signing off on the purchase order that, you know, so if it gets through, let's say, with the football field, so they wanna get paid for they want their contractor paid, they send their reimbursement request to me. Let's say I decide, okay, that's fine, and I send it up to the mayor signs it, that's when the money gets sent out.
So they don't really have the money.
So even after it's appropriated and after the mayor signs off on it, it's still, there's a purchase order that's, you know, signed off every single time, that's approved. So if they're gonna change
So
their
she
scope,
knows,
if they're gonna
in theory.
change their scope that much, you know, I'm gonna have a problem forwarding a purchase if the CPA applied for, you know, if there's the football field and they're building a track, and they're using their.
Assuming you'd be able to see that from the
Right.
invoices that are coming up.
And their invoice does have to come back
I
through,
mean-
True.
even though it goes to their school business manager, it still has to come back through our auditor before anything's ever officially paid.
So there are checks and balances.
So there is a check and balance even with the school department, in other
And
words.
so-
Now, I know they do have a lot of latitude because they have autonomy, so they do have a lot of latitude. But I know the auditor has to sign off on all their appropriations and they all have to go back to the city auditor.
And the mayor or whoever, the city council are aware of the bidding process that's going on, so you know that they're supposed to be bidding a football field, and if suddenly the bidding process goes out for a track,
You're gonna know.
people should
Yeah, because
know that.
because the mayor's gonna put the bid out.
In
So
theory.
it seems like our actions are really still the same. Basically, what we want is some language that expresses our intent. Then hopefully that goes all the way up the food chain and all the committees and the mayor understand our intention, which in that language can say is to just avoid anyone radically abusing or so extremely changing the nature of the project that it wasn't the project that was approved. And if everybody understands that and all the players in the game, hopefully
Acting in good faith.
acting in good faith.
Better
then-
off than where we were the last time.
Right.
Right.
And there is a little precedent for this. I remember when Parsons Village, you were on, Jay, I don't know how many
Yeah.
else were on, but when Parsons Village was originally approved, it was under a regular 40R approval, and then the planning board turned it down. And then Valley CDC came back and ran a 40B through this, kind of against the city planning board.
Okay.
And the city council actually did come back to CPA and say,
What's a
did you
40B?
intend,
I'm not sure.
40B is they have a right on, because we don't have 10% of low-income housing. So they can basically, it's a much easier process to get approved. So they went under that and essentially forced the city to build it, even though the planning board didn't want it. And the city council did come back to the CPA and say, what was your intent? Do you still want to,
Fund this.
do you still want to fund this?
But again, that was after.
After, but they hadn't got the money yet, so in other words, did they want us to try to rescind the appropriation? I believe the CPA committee said that they didn't, that they still would.
Still
give the
fund it.
money. But I mean, it was a case where the city council did come back
For consultation.
for a consultation
yeah.
saying that this is kind of
And
a
I think
change, at least a change, not necessarily a change in the project, but a change in the whole scope of what was approved. So I think, it's, you know,
That's
there is
best
a
case
line,
scenario, I think
there are
we're
lines of
looking out for.
communication.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I think we go forward with some types of conditions and we see how it plays out
Right.
next year.
Right, so we'll, as I said, next meeting, maybe between Jamie and I, we'll try to get some actual language now with what the thoughts were tonight, and then, you know, we can tweak it next meeting and hopefully put something into.
Sounds
Yeah,
great.
and then can I just pull you on that sort of next meeting thing? If there's no applications on the agenda, if there's nothing new, and it's just this discussion, how do people feel about?
I mean, I don't see a sense of having a meeting if it's just for this, because, I mean, we don't really have to have this in place
That's right.
until we give out the next,
We could do it before the next.
applicant
meeting with
comes.
an applicant.
And now we're moving into almost
Well, it's a
where,
process thing, so it's not even like critical that it's.
Right.
you know,
But I mean, while there is nothing on the agenda, it's easy to have these discussions. When there's applicants in front of us, it's much harder to, you know, after questioning them for an hour and change, and then no one wants to sit around and then talk about process.
No, I agree. I mean, I've been
So,
wholly enjoying this because I know that we don't have a lot going on this meeting, so I'm
So you
able to
actually
like
could-
ask a
could
bunch of
actually,
questions
like-
and like have this kind of conversation and not feel pressure to, you know, do it in 5 or 10 minutes
Well,
at the
we
end of the
can
meeting.
do it at
or
the October
something, so.
15th meeting then. try to-
I mean, if you guys wanna do it at the
Yeah.
October, I mean, I don't mind meeting, it's, you know, it's up to you.
Yeah, if it's a little bit low pressure environment and we can get it sorted out, yeah. Might as well better be ready
And then we'll have it
try to
done.
figure out on the fly, right?
That way we'll come up, you and I, Jamie, try to come up with some specific,
no, I always feel like, you know, I never know what the committee wants to do, and, you know, it makes sense, in my opinion, to work on these things while there's nothing going on, because.
and if
They
anybody
always-
else wants to, between now and the next meeting, anybody else has something they wanna discuss with the committee in general, just get it to Jamie before, so she can put it on the agenda, and then we can discuss that too, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if there's anything else, you know, that anybody has on their mind on how the CPA could run better, or ways we could improve.
Can I put a request in for, if we do a meeting next month, that is
You
pretty
want it-
blank agenda,
You
except
want
for
it on
this kind of
Halloween
thing?
or something, so
No, I-
you don't have to
Gotta
be
work
homemade and
on
No,
all.
I actually, is there any way to get I don't wanna say like a flow chart or something, but like, I'm a visual person, and I forget things too, so, what we were just talking about as far as the process and appropriations and then how the invoices end up going through the auditor, I mean, this is all new to me, right?
I know
So,
what you're saying.
like, is there, but your knowledge is pretty, both between the two of you, like, I'm wondering if we can just have like a single sheeter or
Of
something
how-
like that.
How it
That
works.
helps,
How the money
that helps
flows,
me
like-
see the steps. I just like, as a reference,
I
right?
second that, I could use that.
Yeah, I haven't heard
As the
of it.
newbie here,
How the money flows.
I really-
I mean,
Yeah,
How
and
the system works.
How the,
yeah.
well,
In
how
general.
the system
Has anyone ever done that?
work.
Is there one
and it might just be a good
in the
point,
system
you know,
somewhere that
In the
they
future to have
for-
two, so that if questions come
I
in.
could probably easily put something to,
Okay.
it's
I
not.
didn't know if someone
It's not that, you know,
Yeah.
did one for some other exercise to streamline the
I
process.
mean, hopefully it won't be too big an exercise to put it together, but I think it'll be very
No.
useful for me, and
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, I agree with you.
when Jamie comes in and throws the thing out from the.
Yeah.
Roll.
Slide
It'll
presentation.
go back.
Step one, you know.
the city ordinance.
Yeah, maybe we could put it right around the room in a circular thing. Okay, anything else, Jamie?
I think that's everything that,
Okay. So, we will have a meeting on, the
October
15th of October. And I'll take a motion to adjourn if someone wants to make one.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Motion is second to adjourn. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.